Hiding in a hutong of Beijing is a small shop. When you go inside, you maybe feel that you're visiting a history museum because of the old pictures hanging on the wall. The owner of the shop is not Chinese, he's Danish, Lars Ulrik Thom. Lars and his friend Simon has spent more than 10 years collecting old pictures and opened this shop to share their achievements with people from all over the world. Today, I'm very happy to have Lars in our studio to discuss his project and all his exhibits. Welcome to our show, Lars.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming over. So what have you brought over? We're talking about Spring Festival. Shall we center on this theme? And
man, I thought that because it's like, the New Year's, and every year my small company will make like a themed calendar about Beijing, where we use the collection of old photos that we have collected of old Beijing to make a calendar. So it's like we have all kinds of calendars, and we've made about the central axis, and we made one about traffic in Beijing, and we made one
with
about
all old pictures.
Yeah, always old pictures.
Always
So the idea was pretty much everything we do is to look at the development. Like when we started collecting these pictures, we realized that they were a very, very good tool into understanding how did we get here? How did Beijing become the city it is today?
So where do you get these pictures? Family get together where everybody's on the picture, granny in the middle, children and adults. Where do you collect all of these? These are private photos.
Yes. So that's a very good question. Like pictures like the one you're looking at right now, that kind of picture we can find a lot of in Beijing and in China, because those pictures, Chinese families took a lot of them. Lao She, the author, he actually wrote a little piece about the pictures taken in the 1920s and the 1930s, and how all families would have like many, many pictures on their walls, but they would all be like the pictures you can see there, like, representing the family. Like in Chinese, I believe you say, 笑不露齿, right?
笑不露齿.
Yeah, like everybody will be looking into the camera and not smiling, not showing their teeth.
Why?
Like in like a very strict, like just like representing themselves, I guess, in like an orderly manner. Whereas the pictures that the foreigners would take, that you can see represented in some of the other calendars, they are more like documentary.
Which one?
Like you can take, for instance, if you take that one, the Beijing on the Move one.
Yeah.
And you can see that inside that one you will have a lot of like, streets with rickshaws in them. You'll have a lot of camels, donkeys, a lot of, all kinds of ancient transportation modes. And the reason you will have them was, that obviously the foreigners coming in, and you can see the wheelbarrow there,
yes.
That the foreigners, they would take these pictures in order to go back to where they come from and tell other people about like what is China, what is exotic, what is interesting about this place. But I think it's important to understand that even though you could say that the pictures taken by foreigners, they are more like documentary-like.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make them entirely truthful, right? Because the foreigners, they would obviously take pictures of what they found exotic,
what did they like?
Like, if it was during the Qing dynasty, they would take pictures of the long queues that the men would have, like the pigtails, or they would like
because it's fascinating.
Yeah, I know, like it would kind of capture them, right?
Yeah.
Or like they would take all the camels. They would take pictures of the camels.
Actually, there were many camels in Beijing back then.
Yeah, I know, and there were quite a lot actually, and up till like the 1970s, you could still see camels in the streets of Beijing.
Sure.
So that's interesting. Another thing that they would often also take pictures of were the rickshaws. And I think that it's very fascinating that for us in Europe, we think about the rickshaw as something distinctively Chinese or Asian. But you know that the Chinese people call the rickshaw 洋车 because it actually came in from abroad. It was actually a Frenchman that made one of these in Japan and then brought it in to China. So to the Chinese people, it was actually a foreign vehicle. Yeah. So I think that's interesting, and that's why I say that it's not actually necessarily more truthful to what was Beijing like, because one thing that you don't find very much in these kind of pictures are other foreigners, and I think that's because
foreigners want to capture the China.
Yeah, exactly. So they were. So I think they would be like, get out of my picture. I only want like the authentic China thing Chinese going on, right?
Yeah. I think it's pretty much the same thing nowadays too. When they come to China, they still want to capture what is China, right?
I think so. I totally agree. Lao She in that piece I just talked to you about, I think he's got a really interesting and very humorous description of this, because he's saying that if your friends are coming to your house and you will have like, calligraphy or Chinese paintings on your walls, your friends, they will want to brag. They will say like, no, that character is not like totally the way you should do it, and it's not like really good made Chinese painting, like to show their culture. Yeah. But if you put pictures of yourself and your family on the walls, it's way too direct. They can't criticize. So in this way, you can control like
what
the discussion.
Yeah,
exactly. So I thought that's a very interesting point.
I never thought about it. Maybe later on, when I decorate my home, I'll think about putting more pictures of myself.
Okay. Take the advice of Lao She. I wouldn't call it a museum. We call it a space, a public history space, because people can come here and then they can hear stories from this neighborhood that we have collected, and they can see our collection of old maps. So I hope that they will be able to, in this space, form a relation to the city of Beijing. So I think creating that relation and that interest and opening kind of that window to a lot of people to understand that this is actually very interesting, and through these patterns we can understand our own history better, because that's what history is to me.
How are these exhibitions, how are these pictures received in your shop? What are the reactions of people when they come in and see these photos?
We have one that is like tourists, right? And they will come in and be a little bit like what we talked about, just having an idea about China that they would like confirmed, and they don't have too much in-depth knowledge about
Chinese tourists or foreign tourists?
That's a good point. Like I'm talking about foreign tourists now, but we actually also have a lot of like Chinese tourists and like just Beijing people that are very interested in what we're doing, and coming and discussing and sharing their stories, and we're extremely happy about that. And then we also often work with like schools and other organizations that are maybe based in China, in order to kind of broaden their view of what is China. Because I think for me, what we do is that we challenge a little bit the idea, some of the kind of more caricature ideas about what is China.
Why?
Because I think it's important to kind of try to understand a little bit more in depth, like what kind of a history has Beijing gone through, and and if I can come with an example, then we've just made this one we call like Beijing Arrivals. Beijing has been ruled by the Manchus and the Mongols and Chinese coming up from the south, right? So Beijing has been changing all the time. So Lao Beijing is not like one place. Now in this place in Dasla, like we are starting to make like an oral history. Here we have a lot of pictures from like her life, and here her story. We thought that it was interesting if people could actually hear the voices, and then you are able to kind of look at the pictures and then listen to it in like a kind of a telephone style. We want people to be able to relate to all of these histories of people. I think that these small stories, sometimes they're just as important as the big stories. So it's important that we don't only focus on stories of famous people, but also take like the stories. I also record the stories of Putong Lao Baixing, and their kind of ways of looking at the world and their decisions and their stories and what they have gone through. 胡琼明做这些毛笔确实是很有意思的一个过程，然后我们就变成了朋友。
我们也挺感谢他的，真的，他呢怎么说呀？他吧，好多人来参观吧，这是对中国文化的一种宣传。这做毛笔也是历史传承的东西，所以哎呀，我说你看看，一个外国人都比咱们说实在的自己都懂得的多，比咱们都知道去哎呀宣传这文化。我说那太感谢他了。他每次到我们家去，我都特别的那什么。是，真的。
那个我们做那个包子，我们吃过他们做的包子，特别好吃。Why we think Dar es Salaam is interesting is like because before, if you came into the city as a commoner, as a person without many means, this was your first stop. This was how you would find your way into urban society. So this was from a lot of like people that came in without a lot of education. They would become what you in Chinese call a 学徒.
Apprentice.
An apprentice. They would be kind of taken in by the shops that would also kind of vouch for them. They would work for 3 years without pay, but the shops would feed them, and they would be, sleeping on the wooden floor and all kinds of. It was really terrible conditions for these people. But through those 3 years, you could say, they would earn their right to become a Beijinger.
Potentially becoming a master, somebody who can provide for himself.
Yeah, and also just earn your right to live within the city of Beijing, because that before liberation, and obviously during the dynasties, you could not just freely settle in the city of Beijing. Okay. You would need your permit.
It's like the gateway to
exactly.
enter Beijing and be part of the city.
Exactly.
Looking at the state that Dar es Salaam is at today and looking at the city we're living in now, what kind of a surrealistic feeling you must have?
I know.
A travel through time in the same place.
Yeah.
How is that like?
Well, but it's very true that I think Dar es Salaam still contains a lot of history, but obviously it has changed a lot. But I think that what really fascinates me about Dar es Salaam and Beijing is that you have so many layers of it. You can find things dating back to the Ming Dynasty, to the Qing Dynasty, to the Republican period, and things that were made yesterday. And you can almost always see the future lurking behind, and all kinds of new constructions rising up, and all of this merges together in Dar es Salaam in a very fascinating way.
Do you have a message? Do you have a mission? Secret, underneath, deep down, do you have something you want to tell with these pictures, or you want to ask people to pay attention to?
How can you learn from history if memory is lost? That if you tear down all of the old city and maybe rebuild it like you think it was, then you will lose a very important piece of reference to the past. Another thing is that I think that through the pictures we can kind of piece together the history of Beijing. And for me as a foreigner, I will often be very surprised when I see these old pictures, and it will often show me how arrogant I has been, how much I thought I knew about China that I didn't really know. So I think it's a good tool into kind of unearthing the Chinese history and the Chinese original ideas of things.
Yeah.
So like I think that is what our Beijing Postcards main mission is, I would say.
Thank you very much, Lars, for coming to the show today. Thank you.